Hello, we're going to take a little bit of time today to discuss some of the main adjustments that should be made to your combine and header before you get into the cornfield to really optimize this machine. Looking at these row units, we're on a C12F today, but this is really the same row unit as the 700 series machine, so there's no difference on what we're talking about here, but the adjustments I'm going to talk about are the same on the 600 series heads as well, so just keep that in mind as we discuss that. But when we start to inspect the row units before season, obviously the first thing I want to look at is how tight our gathering chains are, and then the condition of the fingers here that we want to make sure it can grab that crop and flow through. One thing that we've noticed over the past couple years, if we get a lot of cannibalization within the stock, they may break off and build up at the front side of this row unit and have a hard time feeding that in. So one adjustment that I want you guys to be aware of, and this may be an in-field adjustment if you run into this scenario, we can actually change or flop these gathering chains over and have them on here backwards, which will make them a much more aggressive setting to help pull that fodder into the head. Otherwise, if that doesn't quite cut it, you can actually line or time these tines together, and that's the most aggressive setting. So know that we do have some adjustment here that we can make in order to help manage dry fodder. But other than that, you really just want to make sure that you have the adjustment right, the chain's tight. I would take the chain off, check your roller bearings in your sprockets, both the lower and upper sprockets here, and make sure that they're intact. From there, you'd be looking at your stripper plate here. Probably the most important thing is to make sure you're not getting a half moon shape or a worn spot within that stripper plate. And then probably most importantly, make sure that they can move through their full range of motion. We'll get a lot of scenarios where the stock diameter will change pretty regularly going through the field. And in those cases, you want to be able to adjust those plates to run almost touching those stalks. That's the best condition to help prevent butt shelling of the corn. So make sure that those are loose and free moving. From there, move down to your rolls. When we look at them again, you can get a little bit of that same cupping that we were talking about on the stripper plate, and then their alignment as well. So just make sure they're in good shape and are in good condition to be able to break off those rolls. Now I'm going to take you over, I'm going to show you a couple different roll options that we have. A couple options that we have on the rolls today is the opposed, which I don't have with me today unfortunately, but that's an option that's been on the head since the 893, 693s, that vintage of corn head, so most of us are pretty familiar with that. And then in the 600 series, they introduced this idea of the intermeshing roll, and this has been a really common option across the John Deere platform for quite a while. What's nice about this roll is it will mesh more directly, so it does a lot better job of grabbing the stock and pulling the stock through the row unit, where the opposed, when they're brand new especially, or dry fodder, they'll just break that stock off and you'll get the whole plant go through the machine. That's what we're trying to avoid. So the intermeshing is kind of a good middle ground where we're going to get a really good crimp and cut on that plant, but it's going to do a better job of actually pulling that plant through the corn head. Most recently introduced is the Romax chopping roll. This by far is the most aggressive solution, where we're going to leave about an inch cut material, so it's going to actually chop that stock to a much finer material so it breaks down a lot better, and then it's going to leave all that fodder right on top of the root ball to help keep some warmth right over the top of that root ball so that material can break down through the winter months. This, like the intermeshing, does a really good job of pulling that whole stock through the row unit. So in most cases, we're not sending much plant material through the combine at all. So this is really what I recommend here, and this is what this head has on it today. So last good check to do on the row unit itself is our gearboxes. These are an oil bath gearbox. So this is a dipstick here. So if you take that cap out, it should have a dipstick on it, and it's just 2 hashes. Make sure your oil is between those hashes. That is at 80-90 or an 80 weight oil. and the GL5 is what you'll find it on the parts counter. But recommend checking those levels, and then at 200 hours actually just replace that oil. So now moving back further in the back of the head, just to talk about the auger real quick. One really important adjustment to make is the auger levelness, so the side-to-side levelness of the auger. And it's really important on these folding corn heads. Honestly, a little easier to adjust than what used to be on the rigid corn heads, but you'll see those adjustment bolts, one on the inside here for this inside auger, and then there's the same adjustment on the outside of the auger. What we need to make sure is the distance from the flighting to the table from the outside to outside of all three augers is equal. That really helps feed that corn evenly. And then two, if that gets off adjustment, especially on this outside one, you'll start to see some kernel damage where those cobs will get lodged underneath the flighting. So just be mindful of that as you set up the corn head for season. One option that's got quite common on the Deere corn heads is the row sense and the sensors thereof. So that's what we're looking at here real quick. When you have it in the shop, it's a really good time to, one, make sure that these are intact and not bent out of shape or anything, but really what I want to make sure is that our gap between these openings is 1.5 to 2 inches. What we'll notice is if this gap is too large and there isn't any feedback to the combine over a short period of time, it will retrofit back to just an AB line, and there'll be a pretty poor performance in the cab. So if we run these in that 1.5 to 2 inches, they should get a good feedback the whole time and work really well for you. So keeping on the idea of precision ag, right next to our row sense sensor is our header height sensors. So on this machine, you would have one on each outside end and your center. The thing to inspect here is the springs that allow for that recoil of this, if it would grab the head cart when it's coming off, or if you accidentally back up with the head on the ground. Make sure those springs are intact to just protect the potentiometer, and then your potentiometer sits in here. You really want to inspect that connector. The dirt and debris or anything could make that connector damage it or get it in a bad position. So just make sure this area is clean and stays clean through the season, and then follow that wiring harness through. There's a pinch point here, and then there'd be a pinch point back up underneath the head as well. So just make sure that that's intact and in good working order. A little bit more specific to the C12, C8 machines is these active end fenders. So we do have a roller bearing here, and debris can start to pile up back behind this roller, and then you've got a couple hydraulic hoses here. Just put a good eye on those and make sure that these function before you get to the field. This is a nice option in either really tall corn if you're trying to cut low, or down corn to keep that ear coming into this row. So nice option to use here. The other good thing to do is make sure that this door can open. This is really nice to have up. Again, if we're shelling really tall corn and the ear's really high off the ground, but we're still wanting to cut low, I would recommend having these up to help keep that ear in the head. Don't worry though, when you go to fold this, you can leave this in this raised position and it will lower accordingly. And then when you go to unfold, it should come back up for you. So another important check is our lube bath for the drive chain that drives our road units. So what you want to do is have this in a raised position, and this is actually your check here. So as long as we got oil coming out of this hole, we're in good shape. To fill a hole, you would take this plate off and fill that bath with oil, and the drain plug is back on the back side. So this is a 200-hour interval here, so at 200 hours we would want to drain this 80-90 oil and replace it as well. But make sure when you start to season that, one, we're not leaking out of the seal, there is an O-ring on the back side of this, and that we have the appropriate amount of oil here. This is on both sides of the head as well. Coming around to the back side of the head, you've got the chain drive for the auger itself. Just make sure that's good intentioned. To be honest with you, I'd recommend just taking that chain off and again inspecting those links, those connections. Make sure that chain's not going to give you any fits in the season, and then you have your adjustments with that idler there. So pretty easy to put your eyes on that, make sure it's in good condition, just easy to overlook too. So I do have that shield off, so it's easier to visualize there. And then coming up underneath the corn head, We have the slip clutches for the row units. There's several grease zerks on that slip clutch. You only grease one of those grease zerks, 10 pumps of a polyurea grease. 200 hours is what the book says, but I would recommend putting probably those 10 pumps once a season to keep that clutch in good working order. So I went ahead and took off one of the stock deflectors for you guys here. So these mount up underneath the row. These have been an option since the 700 series corn heads. A really good option with how that far underneath the head they mount. It's really easy to keep these on the head for if you do trailer this machine, and when it's folding or unfolding, these don't get in the way at all. So really good option. Just a couple key points here. So this first pin, just for reference, this is what mounts the stock deflector onto the row. The second pin is how you adjust the aggressiveness. So the premise behind this is to really lay that stock over, break the stock, crush the stock so it breaks down really well. One thing that we've noticed in the field is if these are set too aggressive and the fodder gets any amount of moisture on it whatsoever, you will actually build material in front of the deflector and eventually you'll slip the clutch. And it's easy to think that there's something going wrong with the row itself, but it's actually the fact that we're balling material up in front of the stock deflector. Lastly is really just some main grease points. So really the daily grease points are going just to be your fold hinge points here for these grease zerks, and then 50-hour grease zerks on your PTO drive shafts on both sides of the head. So just try to keep up with that the best you can, but really that's only your daily maintenance on this machine. So now coming along the left-hand side of the machine, we're going to spend a little bit of time here speaking about the rotor and some things to inspect and how to set up the rotor for shelling corn. So when we first look at the rotor, we really need to think about it in two separate halves. You have the front half, which is where we need to do all of our threshing, and then we have the back half where we need to do all of our separating. So really diving into the front section here, or where we're doing our threshing, this machine's set up with round bar concaves. Now that's probably the best option for the machines. I don't see any reason why to go away from the round bar specifically for corn. Now, some things have come out in the marketplace here recently. The Condex, we'll show you that here in a second. That's an excellent solution for both corn and soybeans. And then you have the round bar, but where those other options come into play is if we have really high moisture corn and having a hard time getting those kernels off of the cob. So yes, the Condex is absolutely a fantastic solution, but a trick of the trade, if you will, is if you've got some wheat inserts, which this machine has installed currently, you could put one of those in that front position just to give an abrasive edge that will do a really good job of turning that cob in that rotor and really helping force those kernels off of the cob. So kind of an off-the-book recommendation there, but it does work well. But now we'll show you the Condex concaves. So here's the Condex concave. This is actually a factory solution today, and frankly, I love them. This is a really great solution for soybeans and corn. So as great as the round bar is in corn, you can have trouble with that setup in soybeans too. So that's one reason to go to the Condex in the S and X machines. But what you have here is the Condex is basically taking one Deere section and splitting it in half. So you have two different options here. And what Deere recommends is the max thresh with the max round, and this would be in the forward position. Now, just for clarification, this is a Condex out of an X9. It would look just a little bit different for the S machines, but it's basically the same practice. So with our max thresh here, this does a fantastic job of getting the high moisture corn off of the cob, but at the same time, it's not abrasive enough to where it's going to create any damage in dry corn. And then having that max round right behind it it just makes it a best of both worlds scenario. I would highly encourage you to look at this option. So now looking at the rotor itself, you have those rasp bars on this front half of that rotor. Take your time to inspect those. Make sure you don't have any damaged or worn out, missing, or those types of things. If you do find one that is broken that you need to replace, you do need to replace them in sets of 3 around the rotor to maintain balance in that rotor. Then once you know that we've got the rotor in good condition, take your concaves as tight as they'll go. Maybe need to do that calibration, that zero calibration, so we can run our full range of motion through those concaves. But what I'm looking for is run that concave all the way down and make sure it's level. So we do that by measuring from the rotor itself to that rasp bar, or excuse me, from that rotor itself to the round bar, and you want to check that measurement at the front and the back of this front section. That way we know that that rotor is running true in that concave set. This is one of the most seen issues when I'm out in the field helping customers identify why we have some cleaning capacity issues, and it usually goes back to how well that concave is leveled in comparison to that rotor. Then we'll move back to the separator area. So on this machine, you've got your separator tines, and it's the same story as the rasp bar. We want to make sure those are all intact, in good condition, not worn too bad, and then replace those in sets of 3 as well to maintain that balance of the rotor. Looking at the grates, there are 2 different styles of separator grates. You have what we see here, which is just the general purpose separator grate, or there is a heavy duty separator grate. So really why you would need to jump back and forth between those or move up to the heavy duty in corn specifically, it adds a fin, if you will, on the tines on that separator grate that interrupts that flow of that grain, that will disrupt it and allow that grain to fall through those grates. So high production corn, or if we're really having a hard time of getting the corn out of the rotor with still running a slow RPM on the rotor speed in order to maintain some crop integrity, that's what would be a good solution for that. Now a workaround is our spacers. So if we look at our spacers now, they are installed all the way across the separator grate. That's the book setting for corn. So have those spacers how they are now, installed between the rotor cage and the separator grate to open those grates up a little bit. One off the book suggestion would be to have the spacer not installed and then installed and then not installed. That will do the same thing with the standard separator grates. It will give us a speed bump, if you will, between the second and third separator grates that will effectively do the same thing that the heavy duty separator grates. So give us that spot that seed will slow down and help the centrifugal force push that seed out of the rotor. So to jump ahead just a little bit, typically you would do all of your concave clearance adjustments in the cab. Corn, I think we could do it a little bit differently. I like to go grab an ear of corn, shuck that ear of corn, take that cob, and I want to set my round bar concave clearance to the point where that cob shelled can fit just between the rasp bar and the cage itself. So that's a really good way just to leave that rotor in that generic position, and then adjust your concave to the cob specifically, and then we can open that concave a little bit if we get into a different hybrid where the cob density is a little different. Try to use that cob to adjust your concave clearance here, not just the theoretical numbers that we typically use out of the book. So now moving back to the chaffer and sieve. The biggest struggle that we have with the chaffer and sieve is broken cob. So I really want to make sure I call that out first and foremost, is if we're adjusting that chaffer or sieve a bunch, like going open and then trying to close back down. We really need to get into the combine, I would say, once a day and make sure that we don't have any cob that's lodged in the fingers of the chaffer and sieve that would prevent those from being able to move fully. Because what will happen is you'll get one of these stuck in the middle or on the edge of that row of the chaffer and sieve, and now that whole row of fingers can't move, and that's a great spot for cob tips or a lot of stock pieces to be able to get into your grain tank sepal. So please make sure that we're cleaning the cob out of these sieves pretty regularly. Now, the other thing to think about too is there's two different types of chaffer and sieves out of the factory. You've got the standard or the general purpose, which is what's installed on this machine, and you have the deep tooth. Now, the deep tooth is what the recommendation is for corn. So if you're just going to go out and shell a whole lot of corn, that deep tooth is fantastic. It gives you a lot of capacity. It does a great job of keeping the trash on top of the chaffer and allowing that air to really flow through there really smoothly. And it's almost like that trash is riding on a blanket of air. The problem is when we go to soybeans, they live a little bit of an open hole. So just understand the pros and cons of that. But your adjustments will be very much different between if you have the general purpose or the deep tooth. So just understand what the machine has in it. Quick conversation on your chopper and spreader system here. So for corn, it's pretty straightforward. We want to be in the slow speed, so your T-handle pushed in, and please make sure we pull the knives all the way out. Those cobs will do a number on the knives, so just completely disengage your chopper knives for corn. And when we look at the paddles and the spread pattern, frankly, there's not too much that we're having to worry about there. This style spreader is going to do a fantastic job of spreading the trash in your cornfield. All right, now we're starting our trip around the right-hand side of the machine, and our first stop is going to be our deflector here. So it is really important in corn that we move this down into the corn position. Again, the cobs will do a lot of damage to our chopper if we're not putting this in the right position. Okay, a couple different talking points here by our clean grain elevator and our tailings elevator. So first and foremost, if this is an S780, so we have our rethresher. So you want to make sure that this is in the grain or the corn icon there. Just manage that, make sure that the components and everything's clean. It's got like its small rasp bars, and really it's just a baby rotor that we need to protect. And then this is a good example of, we got a handful of chains on the machine. I highly encourage just taking the chain off, making sure that all the links are intact, all the connectors are intact, and just overall quality of the chain. And then this machine has the harvest automation cameras. So we got one on the tailings and one on the clean grain. Please go ahead and open those up, take some Windex, clean off that screen in front of the camera, as well as make sure there's no leftover debris or material in this chamber here that's going to get in the way of those cameras. And that would be a point where they would throw a fault code, and you would have to open those up when there's material in there. And on these machines, you've got your auger for your moisture sensor that also feeds your camera for the clean grain, as well as a secondary motor for the tailings. Please take these augers out and clean any debris or trash that is still left in these. It's extremely common to blow the fuses for these motors because of trash still being in those motors at the start of the season. That's a phone call I get pretty regularly. So just go ahead and inspect that now before we get into the field. Now, as far as the adjustments on the elevator chains themselves, you can see that this machine still has a fair amount of adjustment left in it. So I imagine the clean grain elevator is in pretty good shape, but you can remove up to 2 links before you need to replace that clean grain elevator, and really inspect the paddles of this clean grain elevator. This is extremely important to make sure that it's in really good shape, especially going into this fall. that we can get the grain away from the cleaning system. We can, especially on the 790s, 780s, we can be a backlog here. So let's take the time to inspect this, make sure it's all free moving, and we can get the grain up into the grain tank. Same thing with the tailings elevator. This is the best way to get extra capacity out of this machine, is that we do run some material through the tailings of this combine and corn. So making sure that it's in good condition, that auger that pulls the material with trash across the machine in order to spread that material out evenly across the chaffer. Okay, now starting at the feeder house here, this is really the first opportunity for the combine to create damage or problems with the material running into the combine. So take your time here. Obviously, we've got our slats that we need to inspect and make sure are in good condition all the way around that drum, and that our chains are tight. Again, we can remove a couple links before we need to replace this feeder house chain here. One recommendation, so right now the smooth edge is down. We can move this serrated edge down if we get into like really high moisture corn or something, or if we feel like we're unfortunately bringing a lot of plant material into the combine and corn. You might be able to get away with putting the serrated edge down in order to help grab that material into the feeder house a little better. But typically you would leave the smooth edge down. Then as far as drum height, you will want that drum in the raised position for corn. So make sure that's in that position, or you will have some ear damage. As far as the drive sprocket, we should be on this smaller 26 tooth drive sprocket. And then moving back to our feed accelerator, we need to be in the low speed for the feed accelerator. Again, high moisture corn, waxy corn. If we're noticing a lot of damage in that corn and we can't seem to clean that damage up in the box, this is probably where we need to make adjustments. So inspect those slats that are on the feed accelerator and make sure that they're all intact and in good position, or good condition, and then the serrated edged ones is what I would recommend there as well. If you do put brand new ones on, it may not be a bad idea to take that hard edge off with like a grinder or something, just to be a little bit easier on that waxy corn. So if you continue to have issues with kernel damage, Deere does sell a feed accelerator slowdown kit that we could put on this machine, and it gets us down below like 300 RPM in order to be a little bit easier on that crop going into the rotor. Now the last thing on the feeder house, I want to spend a little bit of time giving some tips on this multi-point connector here. I've seen a lot of times where these pins will be pushed in both on the combine side and the head side. If you notice that to be a problem, Deere does sell this plastic. You can replace this plastic, this connector and everything in individual parts, which is a good option. But the best thing you really can do is get some dielectric cleaner or contact cleaner and clean this out really well, and then put just a little bit of dielectric grease to help those pins contact when you're taking that head on and off. And then especially at the first part of the season, this cable coming down to your locking pins, those like to freeze up on us. So I would highly encourage working that through its cycle. Make sure those are really free moving, and then use some dry lubricant in order to protect those pins. It's much easier to do now than when you go hook up the head. Now, I do really recommend on any of the newer heads, if you got header height control, row sense, those types of things, it's good practice to actually shut the combine off before you hook up that head. This is can base, so what will happen is if you hook that head up with the combine still running, maybe 1 out of 10 times it's not going to call in correctly, and when you go to engage your header height control or row sense, it doesn't work or doesn't respond. A key cycle should fix that problem, but I think we're getting to the point where it's good habit if we just shut the machine off when we hook up. Okay, so now as far as some of the inside settings or some of the box settings that are adjusted from in the cab, the best place to go to those is it should be on one of your run page here under harvest settings. If it's not, you can go to menu and then harvest settings will be an app in that run page too. But this is where we do adjust that number. So once we know where that cob setting is, or where whatever reference number that cob is able to move through that rasp bar and cage, you'll kind of keep that number in mind and then move up or down from there accordingly. Now, as far as threshing speed, I would recommend starting at least 450, if not 500 RPM. I have noticed that guys are wanting to run a slow enough engine RPM, and what you'll notice is a lot of rotor loss, because we're just screwing that material out the back of the combine without using the right amount of centrifugal force to push the seed out. So start with a high rotor RPM and then adjust it down for cleanliness. And then going to cleaning fan, best recommendation I have for there is to set it at like 1100, 1200 RPM and forget about it. I really don't think you can blow seed out of the back of this machine, so don't limit your cleaning capacity because of your fan speed. Use your sieve, in order to adjust where that airflow's hitting that material to clean up your sample. As far as your chaffer clearance, you're probably going to be in that 10 to 14 range, and then same thing with the sieve. But leave the sieve alone as much as possible. So leave that at a 14 or 15 and then adjust your chaffer to clean up that sample. What you'll notice is, again, if you close down that sieve, you're really going to push a lot of that airflow stream to the back of the cleaning shoe. So leave the sieve as open as you possibly can. That way we've got a lot of airflow coming up through the chaffer. Now, I really understand that this is a lot of information and it can be overwhelming to go from corn to soybeans, back to soybeans, back to corn, and trying to understand where all these numbers are. I highly, highly encourage any operator to download the Equipment Mobile app. If we get into the Equipment Mobile app and go to your machine, we can go to Equipment Information and Crop Settings, and it's going to spell out exactly where John Deere recommends all the outside settings as well as these in the monitor settings too. That way it's not really a guessing game. You've got that number right in the palm of your hand to start the machine. So hopefully this walk around on the machine on setting it for corn specifically has been helpful. I know there's a lot to this. Conditions are going to change pretty regularly as you go through the field, so there's a lot to keep up with. The best recommendation Reynolds can give you, though, is utilize Equipment Mobile. That really is a tremendous app that will walk you through not only these points that we just discussed, but then what adjustments you can make. So you can ask the AI within that app, I've got a lot of tailings, I've got a lot of broken grain, I've got a lot of this or that. It will walk you through some of those adjustments that we just spoke of. And again, there's tremendous more about things like the monitor setup, operations center setup for yield tracking versus hybrids. There's a lot of those things that Reynolds would be more than happy to help you with, so feel free to reach out to our team and we'd love to support you.